Hello and welcome to a new episode of Foodocracy for Her. So when I started this series last May, the idea was to bring out the stories of entrepreneurs in the food world and folks who are women. And today we're going to speak to Meher Kairon from Chandigarh. She's a Chandigarh girl who's traveled all over, first India and then the world for her studies. And then she's come back home and she's started a very interesting business, and it's going to be quite a spicy chat. So without much ado, we are going to sort of this thing. And welcome on board, Meher. Lovely talking to you today.
Hi, Kairon. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
My pleasure. So, okay, that was little Nimki who made his little Hitchcock appearance. So I remember chatting with Meher a few weeks back, and getting to learn about a business. And at that time, also my two cats were playing around me while we were chatting. So it's this thing. So what I find very interesting about Meher's story is that she's gone abroad, done higher education. And she'll tell you her story herself. She's worked in the corporate sector, she's worked in the legal sector, and then she's become a masala wali of sorts. And yeah, and that too, she started the business in the lockdown, and it's a business which is not something which she could do just out of her home or her home kitchen. It involved many parts of the country. So so welcome once again, Meher. So we're going to talk to you about Fairer Foods, and congratulations on your new venture. But just tell us a bit about you're a Chandigarh girl, though you said you left after a while for school. But just tell me a bit about your early food
Yeah,
influences and how was it growing up?
sure. So yeah, as you mentioned, I was born in Chandigarh. I lived here up until I was 9 years old. After which I left for Dehradun. So I went to boarding school from the ages of 9 to 18. To Welham Girls actually in Dehradun. And that was a fantastic experience, sort of growing up in that environment. There were people from all over. It was a great childhood to have because we were sort of very insulated from the world and from technology, and we just sort of got to really, embrace our childhood, which I think is not the case so much more, in today's age. But and then after that, in 2009, after I graduated, I left for the US for my undergraduate degree. So I was at the University of Chicago for about 4 years, where I did a BA in political science. And then after that, I moved to Cambridge, where I did my law degree. So I'm actually a lawyer by training. I'm sort of dual qualified between the UK and here in India as well. So I was at Cambridge for 3 years, and then I started working as a corporate lawyer in London, mostly in private equity. It was at a big American law firm. So yeah, I mean, it was actually in Cambridge that I really started to cook. The law degree was a very challenging one, and so you just sort of needed, a break from all of that, and just sort of it was a good way to, and also British food, or at least the food in our Cambridge college was awful. It was awful, and so mostly it was born out of a necessity of just not wanting to eat the college food, that I really started cooking. And the more I got in, I mean, I got more and more into it, and before long, it became sort of a way to just bust some stress, relax, connect with friends. So that sort of continued when I started working as a lawyer as well. Again, very, very challenging hours. There were days when, or rather, there were weeks on end when I would get home at like 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. So again, cooking was a way to just sort of make sure that I was eating healthy, because when you're spending most of your day in the office, sedentary, it was, so that was sort of it. And then I moved. So I always sort of knew I wanted to move back to India, but I eventually just took the leap in 2019, so about 2 years ago. And then when I moved back, obviously it was a very different country, Kalyan, than what I had left a decade ago. There's
Really?
been a sea change. Yeah, I feel like there's really been a sea change of, sort of the infrastructure in every way. I feel there's been a lot of change. So
And were you working in Chandigarh when you came back, or were you working in some other city?
no, so I actually was working in Bombay, at a venture capital fund. So what I wanted to do, right, is give myself some time to sort of, settle into the country, and also get to know the startup ecosystem a
Hmm.
little bit. And so I felt like the way to do that was to spend some time with at a venture capital fund. And so I was at Lightbox, which was brilliant. It was amazing, really great team. Had a blast working with them, learned a lot, got to work with some amazing founders. That was really, and that really drove home sort of the importance of community as well, and like building a good community around yourself. So I did that for about 6 months and then decided to sort of start working on something of my own. And again, like I was not looking at spices sort of as a business opportunity at all. It was more, I was looking at a few different sectors, and incidentally, that also coincided with when the pandemic really took off. So that was
Mm.
March of last year. I had it was supposed to be for 2 weeks, and it's now been a year and a half.
Yes.
So
and and we are in a fresh lockdown. I mean, I know we are laughing, but what else can one do? Sometimes
really,
it's
what else
just yeah.
can one do? Yeah.
Yes.
So March last year, and I was looking at a few different spaces. But to be honest, the thing is, like, it just felt like there wasn't any real problem or any real issue that I could sort of meaningfully work on or meaningfully contribute to in all of the spaces that I was looking at. And obviously, like everybody else, during lockdown, I was spending much more time in our kitchen, cooking, and so I started to become more curious about the ingredients that were coming from things like that, and specifically spices, because I felt like there's already this curiosity amongst people about, like, in for things like coffee and chocolate, but
Exactly.
you hear about single origin, and people are interested in where it's grown, who's grown it, where it's come from. So I started looking at spices, and the more I looked at it, the more it sort of seemed like there was a lot of scope for improvement, in the product and in the process. And it just seemed like those were very much tied to each other, in that the reason that the product was so compromised, it was stale, adulterated, was because the process itself was very sort of inefficient and inequitable. There were really, really long supply chains. In fact, spices change hands 6 to 7 times on average from when they leave the farm to when they sort of land on your table. And sometimes they've been harvested 2 to 3 years ago.
Yes.
So the date on the packaging is actually just the date that the spice was put into that packet. It
Oh,
doesn't say, yeah, when it
mm,
was
mm.
harvested. And so I just felt like,
That's true. Yeah.
yeah, and we grow fantastic spices here, fantastic, and most of them end up being exported.
You must have seen
For
that, right? In fact, they say that you get the best teas in Harrods and the best Indian spices in Harrods, and
Exactly, and you see like amazing Indian spices being sold abroad, and so it's just a bit like frustrating as an Indian, because you're like, why should that stuff not be available to people here?
mm,
When they're curious about it, when they want to try it. I started looking at that more out of personal curiosity, and it just sort of, I got really sucked into it more and more. And I started sort of working on this, and before, in about 6 to 8 months, it kind of became a full-time gig. So I was like talking to farmers across the country. And the interesting thing that I found also is there's two things. One is that on the consumer side, people are becoming a lot more curious, about where their food is coming from, who's growing it, what's the story behind it, what's in it. And I think, the pandemic and all of the health concerns have made people all the more conscious around that. And
just
they're
to interrupt
getting,
you once, I completely agree with you. But is this going on right up to even the spices and all? Because, like you said, I mean, in fruits, vegetables, coffee,
yeah.
chocolates, we are now trying to figure out, okay, this come from, so and so place in Kerala or Karnataka. But are people asking that about spices?
So I feel like there's a lot of scope to drive that curiosity around spices, right?
Why do
Because
you think?
there's
Why do you think is it not there? Because spices are what defines and makes Indian food distinctive. You know, and
yeah.
it's such a basic part of our this thing. But why do you think that there is no further interest? Like, I don't know how it was 2 generations back, because my mom was a working mom, so she would also get spices out of a packet. But I
Right.
don't know if things were different when people would get it and grind it home. But why do you think it's a bit of a blind spot, isn't it? I mean, you look at a brand, pick it, snip it, and what's your take on this?
So, Kalyan, I think that it's a twofold thing. First is that people were just not as sort of aware and curious, whereas now they are becoming in other food categories as well, and so that's sort of growing here. And the second is that honestly, nobody did it. You know,
Yes,
like,
yes, that's true.
like I would say we are the only spice brand that actually says on our jars front and center, like, let me just grab this jar, I'll
Sure.
show you. So like, it
Yes.
says like right front and center,
Show it,
you,
show it, just hold it. Yeah.
you know, where, yeah. So it says front and center where it's come from. And then on the back as well, we talk a little bit about, where it's grown, what kind of environment it was grown in. And so, like I feel like people, it just wasn't there. And so people didn't sort of didn't think to, like, you look at a packet of masalas and it doesn't say like, oh, it's grown in Gujarat or it's
No,
grown in
no,
Meghalaya.
no.
It's just, I feel like if you put that information in front of people, suddenly they start thinking about it and they're like, oh, actually, yeah, where does this come from? Or like, what's the difference between this version of black pepper versus some other version of black pepper? So it's just about sparking that curiosity, I think. Like,
Yeah, if I can just, there's something which I noted a couple of nights back. I was seeing an Instagram live chat on
mhm.
Katie Parla's page. She's an American food writer based in Italy. And she was doing an Instagram live chat with an olive oil producer or seller or whatever. And that lady was saying that actually, like, uh, olive oil does have a certain shelf life after it's there in the bottle, and you should see which region it comes from, because different regions will have a different effect on the flavor, aroma, and you'll use it for different recipes, food, and stuff. So I mean, they talk in terms of, I mean, just as one talks of wines, so where the
Yeah.
tomatoes have come from, where the olive oil. Did you observe that? I mean, when you were in England, and I'm sure you would have interacted with people from students from Europe, and maybe traveled as well. Do you think that there's more of a curiosity and interest on the origins of the produce out there versus India, in
You
England, or
right.
in Europe or somewhere?
Um, I would say maybe in the US, yeah.
Hmm.
With England, again, it's not a country where a lot of stuff grows,
Yeah,
potatoes at most, but it's not really. Whereas for, so you saw that in Europe, definitely
in
around places like
Europe, right?
Italy.
In
Yeah,
Italy and France, they're very particular about like where the
yeah,
buckwheat comes for the
yeah.
crepes, and yeah.
And I think it's good to have that curiosity because in India, right, like we grow. I honestly have lost count of the number of types and varieties of haldi that are grown in
Yes.
India, and they genuinely differ. When you actually get them all together. So when I was doing the sampling and stuff, I had sort of haldi coming from all over the map: Tamil Nadu,
Hmm.
Kerala, here in Punjab, the Northeast, and they have varying levels of curcumin. They have varying kind of color. They add a different degree of color to the food. And so, they do actually have a tangible effect on the food that you eat. You add a very minuscule amount, right? But it has a disproportionate effect on like the flavor of your food. And so I think now really people are becoming a lot more curious. And with spices, there's always been a lot of excitement around the origin. There's been a lot of
Hmm.
curiosity around the origin of spices. So a funny story that I came across was that actually back in the day, the cinnamon trade, when the cinnamon trade
Yeah.
sort of was starting up, right? Like the cinnamon traders, the Arab traders who were sort of engaged in the cinnamon trade, they would like tell their customers in the West these like fantastical stories about how they had to risk their lives and there were these like fire breathing birds and that's where they got the cinnamon from. So they making up origin stories for donkeys years. But there is always inner curiosity, I think, around the origins of spices, and sort of, and obviously it's
But
tied up.
they must have been great marketers. I
Yeah.
mean, sort
Yeah.
of doing this Sindabad stories about getting cinnamon sort of thing. But what you said about like different types of turmeric having different impact reminds me of a chat which I had on Twitter, a little interaction just a couple of days back, where
Mhm.
I think Surekha was saying, this lady over there, that why is it that in India we don't, when we talk of recipes, we talk of teaspoons or pinches and this, that, handfuls, and not measures. So I was saying that that's probably because that's the way recipes are handed down by grandmoms and moms and so on traditionally, and that's the way. And now there's a bit of a rethink happening because we are trying to standardize it, and that's when Varun Grover, the writer and comedian as well, and songwriter, filmmaker. So
Yeah.
he also chipped in and he said that this could also be because our spices are very I wouldn't say not standard. I would say they're very individualistic. So, like
Yeah.
two turmerics or two chili powders will not have the same potency, and therefore you have to adjust. You know,
Yeah.
kindly adjust is a, you know, it's a virtue, not. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, the other thing tying into that is that people's tastes across the country vary greatly. Regions are used to eating spicier food. Certain regions are more resistant and they want,
Mm.
are used to eating sort of more food that's more sweet and mild.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and and there's fantastic variety when it comes to regional cuisine in India, and regional tastes differ a lot. And I think that's actually interestingly why the spice industry is very fragmented in India, because the like you have like these regional players that dominate, and that makes sense for blends, especially because, for example, if you're buying sambar masala in the south, you expect a very different
Yeah.
sambar versus if you're North
Yeah. If
Indian.
it's an MTR doing it versus, an
Sun
MTR doing a sambar masala versus a North Indian company doing it.
Exactly. So I think that also lends that also plays in. Like there's I don't know how many different kinds of biryani, and they all really taste different.
I
So
just posted something on Awadhi biryani and whether it's a biryani or a pulao.
now.
I want to ask you something before I just get back to spices, which
Mhm.
is something perhaps pertaining more to you. Now, look, you come from Chandigarh, which is Punjab, come Haryana, and one of the reasons where not much is known about regional Indian food, apart from in the south, is that de facto Indian food outside became Punjabi food because it was the Punjabi restaurateurs who would set up the restaurant. So, which meant that you would either have your local food at home or you go out for Chinese or Indian food, which would always be Punjabi, unless
Yeah.
it's in the east, Calcutta, Assam, or Tamil Nadu, where they have their own restaurants and stuff. So, how did you get to know about the food of so many regions, or how did you get to try it out? Was it in England and sort of while cooking, or was it coming here to Chandigarh? How did that happen?
So I'm glad actually that you brought that up, because the other thing I really got into, sort of became interested in regional Indian cooking. Like, I would say only in the last year and a half or so. Because um, what I realized is when I moved
So,
back
so what
home.
were you cooking when you were a student abroad, like spaghettis and salads and that sort of stuff, grills and
A bit of non-Indian stuff, and then obviously when I got homesick, I made Punjabi food. So
dal
rajma,
chawal and
yeah,
rajma and
rajma, dal chawal.
aloo gobi and aloo jeera
Yeah,
and
yeah,
yes, paneer
exactly. Like,
bhurji.
yeah,
Yes, okay,
exactly. So that kind of stuff.
understood.
But became curious, because when I came back, when I moved here, right, I realized, like, I was telling my mom as well. I was like, why have we never made a Bengali dish in this house? So why have we never made Parsi food, for example? And I guess I was exposed to other regional cuisines in Bombay. That's the first time when I was
Yeah,
living in
I think
Bombay.
Bombay is the best city for that in
I
India.
had amazing Gujarati food, really good Parsi food. I was fortunate enough to be invited to somebody's sort of Navjot celebration. And
Oh, okay.
it was amazing. And I realized
Do you remember who was the caterer? We didn't
yes,
ask.
it was actually
Tanas Godiwala?
Naz Godiwala. Yeah, I
Yeah,
actually took
so
a picture of the napkin because I was like, I have to find this lady because the
well,
food
okay.
is
Okay,
amazing.
so then you must see what 3 episodes back I interviewed Tanas for this, and she said that a lot of people would take away the napkins, and she'd have to go and chase them. So she'd be happy to know you that you just clicked a picture and then take the napkin with you.
I took a picture because literally I found the food, and that actually, when I tasted sort of Gujarati food at Swati Snacks, so when I
Yeah.
tasted Tanaz's food
Hmm.
at this at this event that I
Okay.
went to, then I realized that, like, we are missing out. People. I mean, in India, I feel like in households in India, we actually will cook Mexican food before we cook, or Chinese food before we will cook the food of, say, Gujarat or Bengal or Parsi.
Yeah.
And in the process, like, we kind of miss out on a lot of really interesting flavors. And so I have been pushing my mom at home in my sort of friends and family to start cooking more, regional food, and even with fairer foods. Like I'm constantly pushing our customers to cook outside of their comfort zones, and instead of cooking like Italian or Chinese, like why not try a regional cuisine, something from the Northeast or Assamese curry or something, that
You'd
you
put on the Goan ambotik recipe, if I remember, right,
exactly.
on your page.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just feel like that there's a lot of scope to explore cuisine within India, and people should do
And
that.
why did that happen? Like I know that for a lot of people, beginning to experiment during the lockdown is what pushed them towards regional. So was that for you as well, or it's more a coincidence that lockdown and your interest in regional Indian food?
I think for me, I think lockdown is when I actually got time to stop and think about it. Like
Hmm.
I became interested in regional food after the time that I spent living in Bombay, where I actually had really
Yes,
delicious food
same here for me. I mean, I live in Bombay now,
from different became
but
interested in. Yeah.
yeah, but my exposure happened here.
Yeah, the exposure happened there. And so then, once I was back home, there was nothing else to do. And that then I was like, let me experiment with cooking these kind of different cuisines.
No, what I found very interesting in your story, and which I want to sort of highlight for entrepreneurs, especially, is that in most cases, when I do chats in foodocracy for her and for women in the food business, almost for most people, the interest in food was from childhood, and even a desire to be in the whether to be a chef or a restaurant owner or to eventually become a home chef was from childhood or there for quite a few years and then taking it on. Uh, but for you, it was very interesting because you were a venture capitalist, you were in the legal sector, and then like you said that you were actually looking at 3 4 different options. You just wanted to be an entrepreneur, and then you zeroed in on spices. So, given the fact that you chose a sector and then started working on it, do you feel that that put you on a bit of a disadvantage versus someone who was living, breathing spices and then wanting to set up something?
I'll sort of address that in 2 ways. I think that's the interesting thing, that I didn't actually sort of choose spices. Like even when I got interested in spices and I started reading about it and all of that, like I was still looking at other sectors. I didn't
Hmm.
think of spices as like a business opportunity. It was again like it came about more sort of organically.
Hmm.
And it was sort of born more out of like my interest, and then based on that, my realization that like, okay, you can actually deliver something better here versus other industries where I felt like I would just be putting another product out and then throwing a bunch of marketing at it, which didn't seem like an interesting sort of project at all. But that being said, like yes, I do feel like the learning curve is much steeper when you sort of or have not been part of or been exposed to that industry. So like I've had nothing to do with the spice industry, for example. And so and my interest in food has purely been as an outsider, or like from a consumer point of view, not from within the industry. But I think it's twofold. A, that definitely puts you at a disadvantage because your learning curve is much steeper, and you're not familiar with how things are already done. But on the flip side, I think
Hmm.
it also works to your advantage because you're not familiar with how things have been done. So therefore, you actually, in your naivete, like you feel much more comfortable to try things in a radically
Yes.
different way. Which, if you were part of the industry, would be like, "Nahi, ye to nahi chalega, so let's not even attempt it." So, for example, like sourcing directly from farms and stuff, right? And then from farms from far away. I mean, most people that I spoke to in the industry were like, but that's not sustainable, and that may
Hmm.
not scale. And I'm like, it may not. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But at the moment, like there's there are so many farmers that have become much more easily accessible. And so, when you can actually, yeah. So it like allowed me to come at it from a very different point of view and try things that I might not
Hmm.
otherwise have tried had I been in the industry.
No, that makes so much sense. I think both arguments. And like I used to be in the corporate world in market research, and there was this term which you might have come across in recruitment, which is a lateral hire. So where you're hiring someone. So in research, if you're hiring someone who was from advertising or music or the political science or psychiatrist or something like that. So then they bring in learnings from there, and often the fact that they don't have a fixed way of thinking, or in a sense that if you see my path to being a writer, My first job was as a sub-editor in the Asian Age in Calcutta, but for all of 3 weeks till I got my MBA results, and then I did my MBA, and then I was in market research. 2007, I moved into food blogging, which was a hobby, and I continued with my career as a researcher. So there was no thing of being an influencer, this, that, whatever. Then 2012 is when I moved into writing with writing assignments and the books and stuff like that. So which means that I mean there would be a certain skill set which comes in if you are a trained journalist or a chef, which I don't have. Or the on the other hand, there is the way of looking at issues, trends, patterns, which as a sociologist, business school student, and market researcher, one's been trained to learn. So that's a perspective one brings in. So I found that very interesting, which then brings me to my next point. That okay, so you have no background in the industry. You're not from a spices family either, and then you are in Chandigarh, which is sort of neither here nor there, in the sense that it's not like it's neither like a top metro, nor is it like a Jaipur, which is like a spice hub,
Yeah.
or Ahmedabad. And you're looking at this idea has come to you during the lockdown when we were locked down. So how did you like you told me you had conversations with farmers,
Yeah.
you got called in for products, you tested. How did you do this? That's what I'm wondering.
You know what, Kalan, honestly, like in all honesty, the past year has really been one of the hardest, not only obviously of my life, but I feel like across the globe for a lot of people. And it was just sort of dealing with like a drastic change in lifestyle, and also in the middle of that, and then going from sort of living in a different country, being sort of having a very steady job, to being an entrepreneur, which is radically different. And so it was a lot of lifestyle change combined with obviously the global pandemic, combined with trying to set up a new business in the midst of it all. So it was definitely overwhelming at times, very overwhelming at times. And I feel like whenever people talk about an entrepreneurial journey, it's always like, oh, it was like, there's like, you talk about the fun and exciting aspects of like going in, talking to farmers in rural Kerala, or like customers who love you and all of that. But to be honest, like a lot of it is like grunt work, like trying to find suppliers for jars, glass jars, or like, and then realizing that like, because you found a glass jar supply, you actually have to find a different person to provide the caps, because the glass jar people don't make
Oh,
the cans.
oh.
Yeah. So like it's a lot
And
of, so,
then labels.
and then labels, and then it's like there's a lot of steps to it, and you've got to sort of have a handle on all of them. And like like you said, it is very, very difficult during the lockdown, very difficult because you can't go anywhere, and everything has to sort of come to you, and the timelines are just expanded way more because there are shipping delays and all of that. So like I think for me that the most upsetting thing was like not being able to spend time with the farmers at that time, and because of that we sort of started out with sort of smaller quantities that we first lab tested and all of that. So we had, I mean, I had samples coming in every week, like it just became like a spice warehouse. The entire floor smelled of spices, so my mom was like, you need to you need to put these away somewhere now. But yeah, like it, so we would, I was sort of getting on video calls, getting on phone calls. There's language barriers as well, like when you're
Yes,
talking to people
yes.
across the country, and that's a very legitimate thing. Like those are sort of hard to overcome. So I would literally sometimes be putting stuff into Google Translate. Not even kidding. So it's a lot of just hustle, and actually I think the key thing has been having this attitude of like everything is figure outable. You know, so this is what I tell myself like consistently whenever you will, like, you hit so many issues,
Uh,
so many sort of challenges which are like you don't know where to start, where to make head or tail of it, but you just like kind of remind yourself that everything is figure outable,
that reminds me of when I was in Mumbai, I used to stay at a PG, paying guest, and my landlady, who unfortunately passed on a couple of years back, she was Punjabi, and I had just moved in and very young, I started my career, and would
Yeah,
get stressed by so many things, and she would keep telling me, and I was one of the first PGs she was also keeping.
right.
So it was a new experience on both sides. So I was almost like family to her. So she would keep saying, "नहीं नहीं, उफ, चिंता मत करो, आप टेंशन मत लो, सब ठीक हो जाएगा." So I think
Yeah.
that yeah. But that's a very valid point, actually, that language, because it's not just the fact that, say, the English education part of it or this that, but even if one knows one's own language, but beyond that, there was so many dialogues, like dialects. Like yesterday, I was seeing, I was just scrolling on Facebook, and suddenly came an interview of Shah Rukh Khan with the late Yash Chopra, and it was in Hindi, and I couldn't understand what Yashi was saying because it was with a very strong Punjabi accent, and and very fast. And imagine now if you have to speak to, say, a chili producer in Telangana, and stuff. That's interesting. Now, you were also talking about spice testing and so on. So, how did you go about that? Because that's also new to you. And there's scientific ways of testing spices, but there's also like
Yeah.
the culinary part of testing. So, how
Yeah.
did you get any help in for anything, or did you do everything yourself, or did you reach out to people for specific things?
Sure. So, the first is that, so, like I said, it was unfortunate that I wasn't able to spend time now, but then now that as many of the farms as I would have liked, but that the exciting thing is so now we're actually getting, now is we're in the midst of our spring sourcing. So I just did a trip to Abohar, which is sort of near the border with Pakistan, and our mustard farmer sort of has his farm out there. So it was really interesting to meet with them, and I realized it makes a world of difference. If you actually
But
get to
weren't
go
you
there.
weren't you worried traveling during the time of the pandemic?
So I definitely was, but like even my mom, even my parents said the same thing. They're like,
Sure.
you'll be traveling and all of that, and I get it. Obviously, it is a risk, but then you weigh that risk versus sort of in all honesty, like on a risk analysis benefit, like the risk versus benefit analysis, like the benefit really does outweigh. Like I feel like if you take enough precautions with the farms,
The,
everything's outdoors, right? So
yeah,
sort of out
and you would wear a mask and
most of the
everything,
time.
and they would be wearing masks, and you'd be wearing
Yeah,
masks and stuff.
everybody is wearing masks, like very much so. In fact, I was sort of wearing a double mask, and then
Wow.
I also isolate to expose my family and that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, so when you ask me whether I had help, like, yeah, so I ideally would have loved to have found a co-founder, but I was like, I don't want to wait to find something. I might as well get started and see. But my family was immensely helpful. So was immensely helpful. Like both my parents, my dad and my mom. I dragged my brother out on sort of on sort of factory visits. That was helpful. And then like my mommy, she's a very very passionate cook. She loves to cook. My nani and my mommy. So I would try out the spices that we got. We would try them out together, in various recipes to see sort of what kind of color does this haldi lend, or how spicy is this chili. So that we did the sort of culinary end of the testing, but then
And who
the
would
sort
make
of
the spice? So the spice makers would make the masala and give it to you, or do you grind it, or
we
does it
grind.
vary?
So
So
it varies a little bit, but as far as possible, we do the grinding ourselves. The only time we would leave the
so you would
grinding
have to
over.
set that up all. You'll have to set up that also, right? It's like a grinding unit facility sort of thing.
Yes, so I mean, okay, so the grinding, so the reason why we prefer to do the grinding ourselves is because that's where a lot of the adulteration happens. So, I mean, anything in powder form is bound to be adulterated. And honestly, Kalyan, and this is something that I actually want to talk about more, is the fact that the spice industry is rampant in India. Genuinely, the numbers are terrifying. And so sort of like
Sorry, we missed that. What is terrifying?
the numbers are terrifying about the kind of levels of adulteration in the spice industry.
Adulteration levels.
Yeah, and so it's hard to adulterate something like which is in whole form, like with the peppercorns or like
Yeah.
elaichi. But when it comes to powders, it's very very it's scarily easy to
Hmm.
adulterate. There's not enough regulation around it. And so we realize like where a lot of the adulteration happens is in this grinding process. So we try to grind. We in fact do almost all of our grinding ourselves, unless we've like been to their facility, met with the person, and we trust them. And even then we test the sort of do random testing of the stuff that comes through. And the grinding honestly isn't such a big problem anymore, because there are facilities that are sort of certified organic for grinding, so they only grind, so it hasn't, so that's been sort of, I would say, one of the easier parts of the business has been sort of organizing
And
that.
did you travel to any other parts of India apart from Punjab and Pakistan to meet farmers?
Sure. So Pakistan, I didn't travel, just went up to the
No,
border
I
because
mean
the
to the border.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
So we have I have trips coming up now, to Kerala and to Orissa as well, actually, and then to the northeast to Meghalaya. But when the first round of sourcing happened, there were no flights, there were no trains,
Yeah.
everything was sort of clamped down. So that time I didn't get to visit any of the farms. It was all over videos, obviously testing them, sort of coordinating in that way, which obviously took a lot more time. But now, excitingly, over the next 3 or 4 weeks, we're going to have a lot of sourcing trips
Yeah,
going.
but
Because I get to share that on our Instagram as well, which, and
yeah,
people really respond to it. Like they love seeing the sort of the behind the scenes stuff.
yeah. In fact, you even put stories of your staff, including one lady who bought a cycle with her savings from her
Yeah,
salary, and it's
yeah.
always nice to know that the faces behind your products.
It's always nice to know. And also, it just like it wasn't so in all honesty, like the whole like hiring women thing, it's not been like a deliberate and intentional thing. It's just so happened that I'm a woman, I'm a founder, and then it so happens that there are two ladies who handle our ops. They're women. Recently hired a part-time designer. She's fantastic. She obviously is also a woman. So we just, it so happens that that's just how the team has been growing. It's not been like a conscious decision, but it's really good to kind of see up to the ops, the two women who handle our ops, and they're always like telling me what they're planning for, what they're saving for. So that's quite exciting. And I tell them as well, I'm like, main iske liye, like, I'm setting aside for this. And it's just kind of, it's
But it's
that
so
kind of
good because and it's so good because you're sort of generating employment. You're sort of leading to self-reliance. So that's wonderful. What I also find very exciting is that so many of us, I included, often feel that we can't do things, and the lockdown has made things worse, and we had so many plans. But here you're telling me a story of where he had to connect with farmers, so rural folks and people across the country, and in this case, not women. So actually, probably most of them would be men, and
most
you
of them.
couldn't even travel, and then but you found out your ways through video calls, phone calls, and all of that to go ahead. So I mean, your credo earlier that there's always a way. I think you sort of shown that.
Thank you, Galan. That's very kind. But honestly, it's true that things are sort of figure outable if you kind of put yourself to it. But even so, like you're you're right in that with the lockdown, like it just everything just seemed that much harder and much more impossible. And it also takes the fun out of doing a lot of things, right? Like part of the fun is getting to meet the people and talk with them face to face and be able to tell their stories. And I feel like, you know, we didn't have that, at least in the beginning. So that was obviously, and it is challenging, as I mean, again, like, I mean, this is foodocracy for her, so I guess
Yeah,
it's relevant to talk about it here.
of
But
course. Yeah,
like you but at some point you also feel like, okay, it's devolving into a cliche to talk about. But then there is a difference, like we all the emails that I get are still like, dear sir. They assume it's not a woman running this business. Or like, I actually had a packaging supplier when I was discussing with them, about sort of the boxing and all of that. And I was sat there, and this person looks at me, and he's like, "Madam, आप ये क्यों कर रही हो? ये कोई औरत का काम थोड़ी है. आप बुटीक खोल लीजिए या आप ज्वेलरी का शोरूम खोल." What? Like, I mean, it's 2020, but it's 2021, but like you still hear that. And not just once, you hear it like several times, and I was telling, so like ladies, like I asked them, for their bank details, and she was telling me that one of them told me, I don't have a bank account. And I told her, I was like, you should set one up. You should sort of, so there is a movement towards obviously more sort of women in business, but there's still a bias. For sure, there's still a bias.
no, that's the reason why I started this series, and I had this at the back of my mind that some people might say that, oh, why are you doing it about women? Are you saying that women are different? Is that? But I felt that it's important to tell these stories. Like I remember, like when I interviewed Pooja Dhingra, then she
Yeah.
was saying that there were so many times when she'd go into a meeting, and the person at the other end would talk to say her. So the male member in the team who's actually reporting to her, then finally when everything would come, and then the time to come to sign the check would happen, then she would sort of take out the you know check and sign it. So how does that make I mean, since it is photocracy for her and this thing, so how does that make you feel, Meher? Does that make you angry? Does that make you disheartened, or do you take it in your stride? How do you channel this sort of situation?
Yeah. It's interesting what you said. I mean, with Pooja, I mean, she's
And
obviously
she's a known
well
face. I mean,
well
Pooja's
known.
such.
Exactly. She's a
Yeah.
well-known entrepreneur. But it's true, like I got on calls with some of our machinery suppliers, right? And they would not take, they would just be like, Madam, aap boss se baat karwao. And I'm just like,
What if you said, "Boss, mera mummy hai"? Still, still.
so it's like like I will say this, like it's irritating. It is irritating and it is a bit disheartening and it does make you feel a bit angry. But I think like on the flip side, like dwelling on it is also a bit counterproductive.
Hmm.
So you do have to just crack on with it. You can't like, you know, you take note of it and you tell yourself that you are going to be a part of the change, and do what you can to kind of contribute to that. But you can't sort of hold on to those comments and then just let them bring you down, because the person who's made them has made them flippantly and moved on with their life. If you're going to let it affect you, then it's going to sort of hinder your business and your life. And so you do have to sort of just sort of put it to one corner of your mind and focus on the work. But it's frustrating, because you don't
But,
hear. Yeah.
go ahead, you're saying because you don't
No, I
get.
was saying, yeah, every couple of weeks you'll have, and even on Instagram, like social media as well, like, right? Like I'm a founder who likes to get in front of the business. Like I want people, like if I'm putting a product out there, like I'm so certain to associate me with that product, right? That's sort of the level of that we aspire to. And so, a lot of the times, like people on social media will sort of find your LinkedIn or something, and then you get like DMs being like, "Are you married?" and stuff, and it's very frustrating in all honesty, because I'm like, you wouldn't be
Hmm.
asking, it's just why treat female founders differently, like it's a bit, it is a bit frustrating, but I think the key is not to dwell on it too much. Yeah.
You said something a bit earlier, which sort of made me smile, because when you said that people say it flippantly and then go off, and then it so our doctor, Dr. Margaret Miranda, a few years back, we'd gone to her for something, and we just maybe mentioned something like that, and she said the same thing. So I mean, yes, and the other thing which you said about as a change maker. So I mean, I spoke about Pooja earlier, and who faces this, you, and but the thing is that fact that all of you are like creating all these businesses, all these models, business models, and are therefore, and then you're giving employment, generating employment for women. You're becoming role models. Like when I'm hearing your story, um, because I'm not a woman, I'm getting inspired as an entrepreneur. So I'm
Very
respecting
kind.
you for that. So
Yeah.
I think that that is the way change will be brought about, because I mean, one has been the receiving end of various things. I mean, there's gender, there's caste, there's
Yeah.
class, there is religion, this
Yeah.
thing. But I think to channel that and to go ahead, I think what you said is, which brings me to the next point. I should have maybe this. I should have asked this in the beginning. Why fairer trades, fairer than home? Sorry, fairer spices, fairer than home. And
Sure. Yeah, we actually get a lot of questions. First of all, I have to say that's very kind of you to ask that, because I mean, it's we're just at the beginning, and like I said to you, I suppose once earlier as well, like it's at the very start of our journey, but it does feel good to sort of have taken some steps, even baby steps, in the right direction, right? So that's definitely positive. Obviously, we have a very long way to go, but you're right. There is this surge of women entrepreneurs in the country, and you know, in the food space as well. And it's great to see that camaraderie. Like I frequently interact with this pastry chef from Delhi, Chef Bani. She runs Miyam Patisserie. And we've never actually met. We're kind of just Instagram
Yeah.
friends. But like you see that, or the chocolatiers behind all things chocolate, all things chocolates. And you know, so there's a lot of women who are sort of running their businesses and having a great time doing so. So it's kind of very, it's good to see how they're doing it. Talk to them about what their learnings have been, what you can sort of put into play for your own business. But you know, there is a sort of community, and I really enjoy that as well. Like it's
I mean,
fun to be a
that
part.
is one of my aims at Foodocracy for her to like just show all the amazing work which is happening, because maybe some of it one knows, or maybe like I knew of what you were doing, but it's only when we had this chat that one got to know of like all the steps you've taken. Yeah,
Right. So you asked why Fairer Foods, and we actually
yeah,
get a lot.
my favorite foods.
A very curious, I guess, name for a spice company. But the reason it's called Fairer Foods is, you know, because like very simply put, we sort of have one aim, which is to build fairer food supply chains, in this, you know, fairer spice supply chains, right from the farmer to the consumer. So the way we look at it, and what I said to you earlier, is that, you know, we feel like there are two main issues with the spice industry. One is that the quality of the product, you know, in that it's stale, it's adulterated, and the other is that the farmers, the spice farmers, the growers are they're paid very poorly. They're paid a very minuscule portion of sort of the MRP that the customer pays. And I feel, and the cause for both of those is one, which is you know, long and opaque supply chains. And then sort of the solution as well is one, which is, you know, building short, transparent supply chains. Very straightforward. It's sort of what we want to work towards, is building the shortest, most transparent supply chains in the spice industry, which in effect means sourcing directly from the growers, you know, doing the grinding ourselves as far as we can, and then like delivering straight to the customer, you know, and not letting it lie on supermarket shelves and things like that. So you know, it's sort of that all has flowed very straightforwardly, and so in the end we realized we want to deliver sort of a product that is fairer for the farmers and it's fairer for the customers. So that's sort of where the whole the name comes from. Pretty
Oh,
straightforward.
lovely.
Yeah.
Oh, lovely. But what is your, you know, your ambition, dream? Because in the sense that, you know, when one thinks of businesses like this, which are like fair trade or organic, the conventional view of this is that they tend to be like small businesses, high value, very, you know, very committed customers. But you know, to grow, you need to go back to larger chains and so on. So is your dream to eventually like become like a large brand and yet sticking true to what the values you believe in? You
Sure.
get what
So
I'm
you
really
know,
saying, right? That sometimes there's
yeah,
a bit
yeah,
of a dichotomy. I mean, there's a reason why those chains came in and
there
stuff
is.
as people are looking at volumes. Like the
Yeah,
Green
no,
Revolution, I mean, that was really for volumes, and
volume. Yeah,
we know what it
completely.
was.
Yeah. I mean, in Punjab, we sort of feel the
Yeah.
effects of that in a very real way. But yeah, I mean, you know, going forward, I think there's a few things, right? That you kind of draw some lines in the sand, and you don't want to sort of compromise on certain core values, right? And even if that comes at the cost of, say, scale and things like that, then that's something that you need to think about, or you find alternative, more creative ways to scale. You know, maybe you add in other products that are farmers, you know, in other countries, spices that are grown elsewhere, you know, in the Middle East or in South America. But you know, I think the one thing that we don't want to do is just become like another big brand that's not really very, you know, where we've lost focus of who we are
Mm.
at the moment. You know, and I mean, I read an interesting, you know, in the US, there's this sort of accelerator called Y Combinator, and the founder of that, he's always giving out this great advice. So one of the things he says is, in the beginning, do things that don't scale, you know, because that is how you set yourself apart. Like that's what makes people sort of love you. And so when it comes with us as well, like the kind of, you asked, what are your plans? What are you hoping for? You know, I want to sort of be as transparent as we can. So for example, that translates to things like, you know, when we get our lab tests for our spices, like I'm hoping to get to a place where we have all of our spices lab tests, and we publish the report on our website, you know, and we're able to sort of publish charts, comparative charts of what the average commodity prices versus what the fair trade prices versus what we pay. So I'm really sort of, that's what I'm aiming for. Like I want to get to a place where we can offer that kind of transparency to our customers, so that they don't even have a thought about putting that trust in us. When it comes to scaling, that's something that we're going to have to figure out. But there are just like, I think that's why I keep talking about our core principles, so that I'm held accountable to them even down the line.
Well, I think that that's
That's sort of it.
a couple of things which I strongly believe in, which is, not looking at scale at the beginning for sure. And
Yeah.
two is having a very clear sense of purpose with a goal, or not forgetting what you want to do. Because, often when you're faced with roadblocks, or when you're seeing what others are doing, remembering that, I think is, so now we said all of this. How do people reach you? How do people order from you? I mean, not DMs to ask whether you're married, but how do people order Fair Food products? It's all
Sure.
online, right? So how
Yeah.
how does one go about it?
Yeah. So at the moment, we sell only through our own website. And we get a lot of interest around from retailers, organic stores, and stuff around the country. More focused on selling through our own website, for a few reasons. One, the key one being that, Kalyan, it gives us a direct line to our customers. And that's really invaluable, both as a business and personally. You have, like, I have customers emailing us, telling us about what they thought. And it's great to hear that, because it's invaluable feedback for us. And also, secondly, our product is a repeat use product, right? Like
Yes.
you find masala, and so we want to sort of keep that line of communication open with our customers. And the only way we can have that is if we have a direct line to them, the way we have a direct line with our farmers. So yeah, basically, it's our website, www.fairfoods.com, and you go on there, and it's a pretty easy and straightforward ordering process. Like, we don't charge anything for cash on delivery. We have cash on delivery on all of our orders, despite the fact that it is a huge pain. But and then we have sort of our shipping is also very straightforward. It's free shipping for orders over 500, and then 100 rupees for anything below. So we try to keep it very, very straightforward, so that people are not getting any surprises later on.
And currently you're in core spices, so you're not doing blends. So you're doing the turmeric, you're doing the chili powder, but you're not doing a ghee roast blend. Just make it
Yeah, so we do
clear.
two blends. We started with two blends only, which is garam masala and sambar masala, because they're used in almost
Yeah,
all
they're,
Indian.
they're, they're sort of news.
Yeah, but we have been getting a really, touch wood, we're fortunate to have gotten a really, really good response so far to our spices, and even to our blends. So a lot of people message to ask whether we have any other blends, or whether we're going to be doing, or whether we can be attempt this other blend. So we are sort of thinking about it. It's hard because it's a very tiny team, right? So there's like maybe five people in total, 5 or 6, small team, so we can only do so much. But we have been getting a lot of interest around blends, so it's something that we might look at. But the focus for the moment has been, single spices from
What you
around the
said
country.
about this customer feedback bit. So one of the earlier folks on Foodocracy for her, Aditi Handa, she's a chef who runs the Baker's Dozen bakery chain, which who knows might come to Chandigarh also soon, because they've been really expanding. So
I
she
hope so.
said that one of the high points is interacting with customers and getting to hear how they've been using the bread. How is this thing? So listen, it's been a fabulous interview. Before I finish, I want to ask you, any learnings which you've had over the last 1 year, which you want to share with people, which is slightly more holistic. I mean, not just spice specific, but
Yeah.
about starting a completely new business, and coming from a different field. Any of mistakes which you made, which you learned from, or yeah,
Sure.
all yours.
So, yeah, I can think of maybe a couple of things. The first is what I said to you earlier, which is that, you have to have this relentless attitude of everything is figure outable. You have to kind of
Yeah.
believe that you have got to figure out and come out on the other side of it. You kind of have to go through something to come out on the other side, right? So that's the first. The second is that, the second is that And that this comes a little bit from my VC sort of background as well. Like I think that the thing you see a lot of companies do is, spend on marketing and advertising, right? So like social media marketing, for example, to get caught up in that, and then that very quickly becomes a black hole of money. So the more you're putting into like Facebook, as the more the more you see your sales go up. But I think like important to build a brand and build community as well. And it's challenging. And I think with any new entrepreneur, they're reluctant to do that because the payoff for that comes much later. It takes
True.
time to build a community, to build trust, to build a brand. But it is so worth investing in that, right from the get-go. I think your community is one of the most valuable assets that you as a business can invest in, because, otherwise sort of you become completely dependent on, marketing dollars. And for us as a business, as a small business, we only have limited funds, right? And we want to spend our funds paying farmers is paying Facebook for ads, So, so we are very focused on organic growth as well. That's not to say we don't do ads. Obviously, we do a little bit of social media marketing so that we can get our word out. But we stay hyper focused on organic growth as well. Like people sort of recommending us to their friends and family, people keeping our customers coming back to us. And so those kind of things are harder because you have to provide a flawless experience to the customer. You have to be so good that people feel prompted to recommend you to people that they know. You have to sort of put effort into your relationship with your customers, whether that's on Instagram or email or whatever. But I feel like that's something as a new business, you should not let that fall to the wayside. You should be really focused on trying to build a community. And as a community, that means, for us, our farm partners, our team, our followers, our newsletter subscribers, obviously our customers as well. So, it's a holistic kind of a, effort.
That's wonderful. In fact, I was thinking of some of my favorite restaurants. Like one of them is Links Pavilion in Mumbai, and the owner tells me that there's their suppliers for fish and meat and all that. So I've been in the business for 60, 70 years. So from their parents' time and stuff. So and then like this community thing, building it really makes a lot of difference, and patience. So thanks so much, Meher. It was absolutely fabulous chatting with you, and one learned so much, and I'm sure our viewers did as well. So first of all, best wishes for fairer foods and your travels and safe travels. And
Thank
folks,
you.
if you're watching it, I think one way of being fair and supporting fairer foods is also to share this story, because it's all organic. There's no advertising money going to go into it. But thanks for the time. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you, Kalan. Thanks so much for having me. It's been wonderful talking to you.
Pleasure. Thank you.